Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video, and today I want to talk to you Spyderco fans for a second. I want to ask you this question. If you were going to be able to design your most perfect Spyderco, what would you give it? Likely you'd say, I'd like a compression lock. Everyone loves the compression lock, and it is a great lock. I'd like it to have a flipper. I'd like to be comfortable in hand. I'd like it to be a particular size, probably in the size range of these two guys rather than these, although I would probably lean toward a larger one. Something similar in, ergonomics to a Para 2 where it's comfortable, it's easy to hold on to, it's easy to play with and actuate. Now, these days, of course, it's popular to have a bearing pivot and certainly popular to have a flipper. And so if you were to kind of put all of these things in a pot together, you'd come out with something not too dissimilar from the Spyderco Sliverax. All right. Now, having pointed that out, I want to have a little bit of a further discussion here because I'm going to suggest that the Spyderco Sliverax is not the most perfect Spyderco that has ever existed. And to me, that's a little disappointing. Okay, I think when we look at this on paper, when Spyderco kind of tells us what they're doing with this knife, we all think to ourselves, this is going to be the most amazing Spyderco that we've ever experienced. And so we really get caught up in the hype. You've got this really cool looking carbon fiber laminate handle. You got this great blade with tons of blade length for the size of the knife, which is 8 inches pretty much exactly. Okay, and so we just look at this, and on paper and even in pictures, it looks like a fantastic knife. And we think, hey, I should buy this and sell all my other Spydercos because it's the best one that there ever will be. All right, and in this review, there are going to be a lot of things that I talk about that are very, very good, but then there are going to be some things that are glaringly bad and really take this out of contention for being anywhere close to the best Spyderco that's ever been built. And along the way, we'll have some discussions that I think we need to have when it comes to new Spyderco models. All right, so first off, let's get to size and weight because, guys, this knife really nails it in terms of size, weight, and carry. This knife is 8 inches overall. It's got a 3 3/8 inch blade length. However, as you can see, the cutting edge even extends past the handle a little bit, giving it over 3.5 inches of actual cutting edge. The handle on this guy is 4 and just a little bit over, and I mean just a hair over 5/8, so a little bit more than 4 5/8 in length. Okay, and the weight is a very impressive, and I mean very impressive, 3.26 ounces. 3.26 ounces, that's fantastic. For a blade of this size and this length, this is really nice. And carrying this knife is an absolute pleasure because of that very lightweight design and construction. You don't even know that you've got this in your pocket, and yet when you take it out, you have a very capable, very substantial full-length blade, which is really nice. And so in terms of weight to size ratio, in handle to blade length ratio, right, it absolutely kills the Para 2, which is something that has often been complained about with this knife. So there's a lot to really love, and you look at this knife and go, wow, they have really done a great job here. And they have on a lot of things. And guess what? The blade is something else that is absolutely excellent. We've got this full flat ground S30V blade here, really nice utility shape, thin behind the edge, slices like a dream. Okay, the blade stock on here is 135 thousandths, so that's just a little thinner than a Para 2, which is like 145 thousandths or so. You've got lots of cutting edge here, and that cutting edge is designed in such a way that it nicely sort of reaches down toward the surface that you want to work on, which is really great. So tons of stuff to love here. Obviously, you guys can hear in the background, I'm getting some Facebook messages. I'll deal with those after the review is over. Maybe it's somebody wanting to talk about this knife in particular. Anyway, so size and weight is absolutely great. The blade, again, is really nice. The Grind is beautiful. It's nice and thin behind the edge. The one thing I would say is you kind of, I don't know, about this much of the blade for sure is not going to be very usable. And in a lot of ways, because of the way the handle is canted. Now, if you're up here working on something, you know, let's imagine I'm cutting this piece of paper, I can get up here and work, no problem. But if you're cutting on a surface, you're not going to be using this part of the blade anyway. So we kind of have, although we have over 3.5 inches of actual cutting length, there is a good portion, probably down here by my index finger. This is not going to see a whole lot of use, okay? And we'll bring that up maybe again when we get to ergonomics. Excuse me. So my overall take on the blade is very good. I love S30V steel. I love full flat ground, especially full flat ground Spydercos. It's got great edge geometry. It's just, you know, this so far so good, guys. We're really, really looking at a great knife. Now, lockup and deployment. We have a compression lock with a bearing pivot and a flipper, okay? So again, nothing wrong with that. We all love compression locks, we all love flippers, and we all love bearing pivots, especially, you know, I guess the challenge would be if, you know, this is sort of going to be a hard use type of knife, which it really isn't. It's definitely more along the lines of a light duty EDC or even a gentleman's knife. All right, the action is pretty nice. It spider flicks very well, okay? Thumb flicks very well. You can actuate the lock and just close it that way. Now, where I can't say very well is it doesn't flip that well at all. Okay, it is not a good flipper. The detent just isn't strong enough. And that's because they wanted to be able to spider flick it. Okay, and I want to talk about that a little bit. Here's where I strongly feel that they should have made a choice. Okay, they should have said either we're going to make a good flipper or we're going to make a knife that we can flick out with our fingers really, really well. Okay, and trying to balance those two out is where Spyderco has kind of messed this up. Is it possible to dial in the detent such that it spider flicks well and flips well? I believe it is, but they haven't done it here. Okay, it flicks really, really nicely. Okay, so doing a spider flick with this really works well. Even doing a thumb flick with this, again, works really, really nicely, but it does not flip open very easily. Every time I flip it, I have to be very intentional. And you can see if I just kind of push down, and so here's my detent rule. When the detent breaks, is that force alone, okay, that force alone enough to deploy the knife? And very clearly, it isn't, okay? Yes, can I say, okay, I know this knife is not going to flip well, so can I be a little bit purposeful and kind of preload it and then get it to flip? Yes, I can. Or I can give it a little bit of wrist and then it'll flip open. So those are my options, okay? Now, that's my first issue with lockup and deployment here, and that is it doesn't flip well. My thought is on that, why put a flipper on it anyway? By the way, a number of people have thought that and done flipper deletes on this knife. There's a few of them out there. I think if you check out Nick Shabazz's channel, he's got that discussion over there. Now, the other issue that I have with this is even if we took away the flipper, the other great feature, or almost great feature, is the compression lock. However, they have failed very badly to make this compression lock right. They've rounded it off here, trying to make it comfortable. What they've done is they've made it so you can't get a hold of it with your finger. My finger naturally wants to just slip off of this lock, which means if I want to unlock the knife, I've really got to bear down. I've got to push down super hard on it and then pinch it over, and now I can deploy it. But I have to push so hard on that lock that it actually causes, you can see the nice line there on my finger, and it's actually pretty uncomfortable. Okay, so that is possibly even my bigger issue with this knife. I could live with a knife that doesn't have a great detent, and Spyderco is pretty famous for that. But I cannot live with a knife that's uncomfortable every single time I want to unlock it. So, and here are the reasons. Let's discuss. Okay, the reason this is uncomfortable is because, one, they haven't given me enough of a cutout here to actually get a hold of this lock. So notice I'm forced down the lock further, which means leverage is now working against me. If I could get at the lock up here, I could much more easily and much more comfortably push it over, but I can't. It can't fit my finger in there. So this needs to be larger. Now, the problem you're going to run into then is, watch what happens. You're going to run into the flippers. You can see they've kind of tried to, let me put this here. So they've kind of tried to make this so that the flipper doesn't really hit your finger too much as the knife is closing. I would have rather had them forget that altogether and make this lock more accessible, because as it stands, I really have to work to get my finger in there, and once I do get it in there, I've really got to hold on to try and get that lock to move over. If they'd at the very least given me a square edge like they have on the Para 2, where I can easily, now let's see the difference here. So hold these two side by side. Notice how I can get a nice good grip on that finger tab. On this side, this guy, not so much. Now, fit and finish wise, this one looks way prettier, there's no question. But in terms of actual use, this is much more comfortable. And I would, you can play with this knife, flick it and open it and close it for hours while you're watching TV or whatever and have no issue. This, not so much. You're gonna find it very uncomfortable very, very quickly. All right, so that's probably my single biggest complaint about this knife, is the lock is very difficult to undo. And the whole detent discussion is they've tried to, and look guys, here's where I want to talk to Spyderco fans for a second. They've tried to do knives that are primarily flippers. And when they do, everyone whines and complains because they can't spider flick the knife. Well, okay, if you're going to insist that every Spyderco has got to be able to be spider flicked, then Spyderco should not try to do flippers, okay? Or at the very least, they need to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to get the detent in the right place. And here's just, to prove a point, I want to share this knife. This is, of course, the Hinderer XM18, and this is a knife that famously has a bad flipper, okay? Guess what? I can flip this knife way easier and without any wrist, okay, than I can this knife. Not only is it easier, but it's more comfortable. And the detent is such that I can still flick this open with my thumb. So it is possible. And this is not a great flipper by any means. And the detent is a little weak for it to flip really well. But compared to, but here's a knife that everyone complains about, and it's much, much better than the Sliverax in terms of that detent being dialed in where it needs to be. All right. So now that you've heard all my complaints about lockup and deployment, and really that's my biggest issue with the whole knife, is the lockup and deployment is just not well done. All right. One other thing I want to show you, more out of interest than anything else before we move on from this point, and that is the interesting way that they've done the stop pin. So you've got a stop pin back here, but as I open the knife, you can see there's another stop pin right here for the open position. Now, obviously this is, let's see, this is touching a little bit here, but they must have needed more surface area, and maybe they had some wear and tear that caused some issues over time in testing. So what they've done is given us a stop pin back here, an open stop, and then, a closed stop. So there's the stop pin back here functioning under that flipper tab. And then the stop pin in here. Now notice that stop pin is not doing anything at this point. It's not touching any part of the blade. It's not until the knife opens that this other stop pin that's hidden in here comes into play. I'm sorry, I know I went out of focus a couple of times in that discussion, but I didn't want to wait for it to focus to go on with the conversation. It would have taken too long. So let's go ahead and now talk about the final piece of the puzzle, which is the handle. And again, we're back to really, really well done. This handle is really nicely finished. It looks extremely attractive. You've got this great wire clip that works exceptionally well. The construction is simple and open so that you're not going to get any kind of gunk in here. You've got this nice open pillar construction, nested liners, beautifully nested liners, by the way. And so again, you look at this knife and you go, man, it is beautiful. It's well put together. This is a knife that's gotten a lot of things right. And it is a knife that's gotten a lot of things right, except for the glaring issue of every time I open it, I have to experience the discomfort and frustration of dealing with that compression lock that is just poorly pulled off. So let's go ahead and get some comparisons in here. And big surprise, most of my comparisons are going to be Spyderco's. First off, let's grab the Para 2. So here it is beside the Paramilitary 2, the knife that really gets the compression lock right. Now Spyderco has tried the compression lock on a couple of other knives, and they seem to have some issues. I would like to see them do it on a military. I would also like to see them do tip-up carry on a military, but I don't know that that will be happening anytime soon. I suspect, I've seen some larger Spydercos where they've done some other sort of alternate engineering in here, and I'm presuming that's to add strength to this lock. So it must be a lock that struggles a little bit when you start getting a really long blade out here. All right, so, excuse me, Para 2. Okay, by the way, this was kind of poised to unseat the Para 2 as the best Spyderco, and I don't think we got there. In fact, I would say we definitely didn't. We also have here the Mannix. This is the Mannix back lock, but it's going to be the same size as a typical Mannix. So for those of you who have one, that should give you a good idea of what you're dealing with in terms of size here. By the way, notice how well they have done on the blade here. One of my complaints about Spydercos is that often you end up with not a great blade to handle ratio. And that is not so with this knife. Finally, just for fun, since it's one of my favorite Spydercos, let's throw in the Mannix 2 XL there at the top. So there are some comparisons for you. For those of you who are Spyderco fans, you'll know what all of these knives are and have a pretty good idea of size and weight on these. And you know, probably the least comfortable lock or the most awkward lock of the bunch is this one, because I do need to get 2 fingers on it in order to be able to close the knife. And that's a little bit annoying, but it's at least not uncomfortable. And I've got to say that the compression lock on this guy actually does become very uncomfortable very, very quickly. All right, so overall impressions. Those are the comparisons out of the way. What is my overall take on this knife? This is a great design. It's super cool. It looks very different. I showed this to a few friends and they like, wow, that is such a different looking knife and it's so cool, and it you know, the ergonomics are good. It kind of fits your hand really nicely, at least in this kind of saber grip. It does work really, really well. By the way, this is a bit of a side point. I think this knife would actually work well with a finger choil, especially since that blade is not doing much for you anyway at this point in the knife. But that's beside the point. It is kind of nice to see a Spyderco that doesn't have a finger choil. So very comfortable, great blade, great weight, great, you know, overall size and weight and versatility, you know, a very carryable and useful knife without question at all. All of the issues come along when we get to lockup and deployment. And that's where, you know, Spyderco has just really struggled. And it feels like you know, I think Spyderco kind of knew that. And I think all of us have been wanting more Spydercos with compression locks, and we haven't seen them. And my suspicion is, I could be totally wrong. And if you work for Spyderco and want to weigh in down below, I could be totally wrong. I hope I am. But I feel like they've struggled with getting the engineering of the compression lock right on other models. It's sort of like lightning struck with the Para 2, and they just can't pull it off well in any other design. And certainly they have not pulled it off well in this design. I hope that they can do a better job with the Shaman. That knife is probably a little more in my wheelhouse than the Sliverax, but So I'm anticipating that will be a knife where they've really got the compression lock right, and I hope it is. Overall though, what's my take on this? It's a very functional knife, okay guys? Everything about it functions the way that it's supposed to, okay? The compression lock does work. The flipping mechanism can be made to work with a little bit of wrist action. Okay, the blade cuts. I mean, it's really, really a great blade design. And so everything does what it's supposed to do, but every time I go to use this knife, I've got to figure out how I'm going to close it. The other aspect is if you do try to do like a drop shut, it doesn't work well, especially left-handed. I've nearly cut myself a couple of times left-handed. So really, they've done everything just amazingly well. And I want to love this knife so bad, but just lockup and deployment is such a failure. So there you go, guys. That's my take on the Spyderco Sliverax, the knife that I wanted to be so awesome, and I had built it up so much in my mind, and it kind of really disappointed me when it came to lockup and deployment. Hope you enjoyed the video. Love to hear your comments down below, especially if I'd love to hear you guys weigh in on some of these things that I've brought up about this knife, especially if you have one yourself. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will talk to you soon.